In today's video, we're going to be talking about one of the most controversial new vehicles you can buy in America today. It is this very angular Tesla Cybertruck. Big shout out to Dan, one of our viewers, who let us borrow his brand new Cybertruck. This is a dual motor all-wheel drive version. It's not the beast version, that's the bonkers fast one, but I do think that this is probably going to be the most popular version of the Cybertruck. So as we dig into the details, if you want to know even more, go further down the rabbit hole and compare this to an F-150. Stay tuned, that video is coming up soon. I will warn you in advance, this video is probably going to run a little bit long, so use that table of contents, scrub along the video, find the sections you're after. But we're going to try and talk about who the Cybertruck is for, who it's not for, what it does well, what it does not do well, and why it looks the way that it does. Well, why some of us think it looks the way that it does anyway. When it comes to styling, I truly believe it's a personal preference. So if you like the Cybertruck, great for you. If you don't like the Cybertruck, also great for you. For me, I am not the biggest fan of its shape, but I think that the design was exactly the right direction to go, because Tesla came a little bit late to this segment. They'd been promising the Cybertruck for a while, but in reality, this is on sale after the Silverado EV, after the Lightning, and after the Rivian R1T. Also, when you look at the specifications on the Cybertruck, it doesn't necessarily do anything better than any of the competition, aside from have access to the Tesla supercharging network and have a better infotainment system on the inside. So looking different, I think, was exactly the right direction for them to go in. Also, trying to market to a different shopper, I guess you could say, was a smart thing to do. Now, design-wise, obviously, very, very divisive. Stainless steel body panels all the way around, including this big front end section here. And the stainless steel panels are definitely, they're not sharp, but they're not exactly dull either. Lots of really harsh edges. This is kind of the formula we saw in the DeLorean, but with a twist, because they avoided any sort of silver painted panels. So the bumper down here, that's a plastic bumper cover. It's black on the front, black on the back, black wheel arches, etc. And I think that's gonna help it age a bit better. Now, as far as the design goes, on the front, we have this big DRL light right there. The turn signals, they're gonna be down here. Headlights are actually inboard there, so they're quite low on the front of the vehicle. And actually, quite low is really the best description of the Cybertruck. This is in its normal ride height mode, so it is relatively low to the ground up front. And then we have that very short hood. The very short hood is there because they wanted to give this a very cab forward style design. Kind of gives me 1990s vibes. The windshield is absolutely enormous. Of course, you've all heard about the absolutely enormous wiper. Here's what's going on. The wiper is vertical like this because it represents less disruption in airflow. You'll notice this is a very, very flat front end. Even though the glass is a little bit below this front trunk lid area there, it's pretty smooth aerodynamically, and putting a traditional cowl and wipers and things in there would really have disrupted the airflow more, and they needed to focus on efficiency with the Cybertruck because it has one of the smaller batteries for an electric truck in North America. Now, on the downside, I will say that this single wiper is not as good at wiping water or other things off of the windshield, probably because it is just so large. So it moves a little bit slower than the wipers in the average half-ton truck, and the wiper washer does not deliver as much water as the average half-ton truck. Also, it doesn't cover quite as much of the windshield as you can see over there. Moving around to the side, you'll definitely notice again that massive single wiper there. You'll also notice that we don't have traditional door handles. We have an electric door release. We press the button, the door pops out a little bit, kind of like we saw in the Mustang Mach-E's back doors. That works relatively well. We also have frameless windows on the doors that helps improve the airflow around the side of the vehicle. Now, dimensionally, this is not as big as some folks had initially assumed. It's 223.7 inches long. That is 6 inches longer than a Rivian R1T, but 8 inches shorter than the Lightning, 9 inches shorter than the upcoming Ram Rev, and 10 inches shorter than a Silverado EV and the upcoming Sierra EV as well. Running down the list of controversies, we also have the very peak-shaped roofline here. It actually doesn't affect ingress or egress for the driver or front passenger because your head's not normally here when you're getting in, it's normally here, and this is actually quite a bit taller than the average half-ton truck's door opening. If you're the kind of person that really doesn't want to wash their vehicle very often and you want to just be able to sand or buff it lightly and have it come out just fine, this is going to be a great alternative. I actually don't mind the stainless steel panels quite as much as some folks do, but of course I have a vehicle in my driveway over there on the other side that is literally growing moss because it's been a really wet winter and I'm just too lazy to wash the Jeep that does nothing more than tow a trailer around the property. More of a problem for me is the fact that we do get ripples on the body panels, and that's why we really don't find slab-sided vehicles like this much in the world, because it's really hard to make something this long actually be flat. And with a little bit of a curve, a little bit of surfacing here and there, not only will it hold the shape better, it's also not going to show the ripples as much as we find here. One of the other reasons for the particular shape of the Cybertruck is that this is a unibody truck, so they needed some extra structure in this area in order to be able to accommodate the 2,500 pounds of payload. Now, I have heard this described as having structural stainless panels, etc. That is not how this Cybertruck ended up being constructed. There was some rumor about that initially, but this is a unibody aluminum construction with stainless steel panels on the outside. And the doors themselves are basically entirely stainless steel. The inner frame, the outer part, etc. All of that is stainless steel for the door construction, but the body itself, it's a more conventional construction. And honestly, that makes the most sense for a vehicle of this particular design. So this definitely has sort of a Chevy Avalanche kind of vibe here with this really long buttress on the side, also kind of like the first generation Honda Ridgeline, for exactly the same reason. We have a big LED light bar in the back, power opening but not power closing tailgate. Right there. Backup lights are right here on either side of that license plate, and then again a plastic covered bumper in the back. At least for the moment, there's just one battery in the Cybertruck. It's a 122.4 kilowatt hour battery, and that feeds either 2 or 3 electric motors at the moment. Coming a little bit later, there's going to be a single motor rear wheel drive Cybertruck, but at the moment you have your choice between 600 horsepower and 845 horsepower. This is the Foundation Edition, so it's the 600 horsepower two-wheel drive model. The Cyber Beast is going to be the one with the absolutely bonkers 0 to 60 times. Currently, this is going to be the longest range version available. According to Tesla, it will go 340 miles. Of course, that does not appear to be EPA rated at the moment, and as we're going to discuss a little bit later in the video, this actually went the exact same distance, interestingly, before exhausting its battery as a Ford Lightning that was rated for 300 miles. Now that shouldn't surprise too much because Tesla has been a little, shall we say, aggressive with their range estimates in the past. The Cybertruck appears to be no different, but any way you slice it, it is definitely more efficient than the Lightning because the Lightning had to have a bigger battery in order to go the same distance. Towing figures definitely solidly healthy here, 11,000 pounds in the Cybertruck versus 10,000 pounds max in most of the competition. Although the base model, the rear wheel drive model coming at some point in the future, that's going to have a lower towing capacity. At this point, we don't know whether the tow rating is SAE rated, but we do know that this particular model actually does have a sticker on the door that says 2,500 pounds of payload, and that is likely thanks to the adaptive air suspension system, which is standard. Charging the battery happens back here in the same place that it happens in every other Tesla, although it is a little bit further from the complete back end of the vehicle than something like a Model 3. The tires and these wheel arches are part of the reason that some people are confused about the dimensions, because the overall width of the vehicle is relatively wide in some areas, like the mirrors, and of course these tires that actually stick out a little bit from the fenders and the fenders themselves, but none of this actually gives you extra space inside. The Cybertruck is full of interesting twists when it comes to charging. The onboard AC charger is rated for 11.5 kilowatts. That's a tiny bit faster than the base charger on the 2023 Lightning, but the Lightning and the GM trucks are going to be available with a 19.2 kilowatt onboard AC charger that will definitely charge their batteries pretty rapidly. Now, that makes sense especially on the GM trucks because those batteries are fantastically large, and the one on the upcoming Ram truck is actually going to be close to double the size of this Cybertruck's battery. That's how the Silverado gets to such fantastic range, because it just has an absolutely honking battery. Unfortunately for 2024, Ford seems to have dropped the 19.2 kilowatt charger option. I haven't been able to get any feedback on that, so that actually puts those two on very level footing. On the other hand, the Tesla's going to charge significantly faster than the Ford if you have the right DC fast charger. Interestingly, that is not going to be a Tesla supercharger at the moment, although I haven't been able to test this on a V4 supercharger. If you take this to a regular V2 station or a V3 station, then it will top out at around 250 kilowatts and it will start decreasing at some point thereafter. But if you take this to an Electrify America station with a CCS to NACS adapter, then you can get over 300 kilowatts because this battery is designed to charge at 800 plus volts. It's actually over 800 volts nominal native on the system. Let's talk about the seats next. Getting in and out of the Cybertruck is pretty easy because the seat bottom cushion is actually quite low to the ground. Now, right now we are in the low height, not the entry height mode. Most folks are probably going to end up in low or medium depending on the drive mode that you're in and whether or not you have the vehicle automatically kneel down when you park. The low mode's probably where most folks are going to end up. And you'll notice that the seat bottom cushion is several inches lower to the ground than something like an F-150, but the door opening is actually higher. So taller drivers aren't going to be bopping their heads on here. I know a lot of folks on our Facebook page were asking about that. I thought about it for a while and I thought, you know, maybe this does make a difference. Maybe I would hit my head on that. And then I hopped in the Lightning and I hit my head on it, and I'd been in and out of this all day and I hadn't. So I actually think it's the reverse just due to where you're going to be entering and exiting the vehicle. We also don't need a grab handle over here for shorter drivers or shorter passengers because it's simply easier for them to get in. The seat itself, I do think this is more comfortable than the average half-ton trucks as well. That shouldn't be surprising because I think Tesla has made some pretty comfortable seats in all of their vehicles. And even though this is not exactly another Tesla seat ripped and then put into the Cybertruck, it definitely feels very similar to some of the other Tesla seats. Now, jumping in the back, the first thing that I noticed is that we definitely have less legroom than the average half-ton truck. So versus something like the Lightning, a Ram, or a Silverado, etc., you're going to find maybe 4 to 5 inches less legroom, but significantly more legroom than the average mid-size truck. This is not a mid-size truck, so definitely more room back here for child seats, adults, taller people, longer-legged people than something like an R1T, Tacoma, etc. And it's actually much more comfortable than you might think, even given the numbers, because you can actually put your feet completely under the driver or front passenger seats because of the way the seat frames and seat design is done. That was a really intelligent thing to do. The floor is completely flat back here. Sorry, the floor is completely flat back here. And we also have a very similar carve-out for the center passenger's feet. We also have a big touchscreen, of course, where they can play games and do that sort of thing. Headroom back here is also pretty generous thanks to the glass roof. Now, not everybody's a fan of the big glass sheet, which is of course why you can buy some solar shades for this setup. If I lean back to the headrest there, or head restraint, that's when my head is touching the bar that I'll show you in a little bit, and that seems to be where headroom is measured from in most of the numbers that I've seen, but in reality, it's almost exactly the same as the F-150. On the other hand, and I will cover this when we get up front, the cabin is narrower than the average half-ton truck in America, several inches in fact, measuring across from window to window or from inside door panel to inside door panel, approximately the shoulder area or the hip area. This is between 3 and 5 inches narrower than the average half-ton truck, and that's part of why the rear seat feels a little bit more compact. But we do again have that flat floor. If I actually pulled the right lever here, we could flip the seat bottom cushion up and we can get a lot of extra storage space. Now, immediately under this area, I did notice that not only does the floor kick up a little bit there towards the rear, but we also have these little bumps that stick out there, probably to help support the seat, but those do take up just a little bit of available storage room. Rather unusually, Tesla gives us 3 sets of latch anchors. That's a touch that I really like. So yes, separate latch anchors for that center seat position, and we have relatively traditional top tether anchors. Now, this could present a problem for some child seats. If you want to know about top tethers and child seats in the Cybertruck more specifically, be sure and stay tuned for that video. I'm going to have a separate one coming out. From this angle, you can see that relatively small rear window. That is probably the biggest downside to the particular slope we have going on here. Now, if I look around here, you'll see what that window looks like from the cargo area, and of course, what that looks like if I were to deploy the tonneau cover. Obviously, it covers that rear window. Now, clearly they did that for the aerodynamic benefit of this particular shape, but does present a little bit of a visibility problem. All right, let's dive into the cargo area. This is not as cut and dry of a conversation as some might think, because this cargo bed is not square or box-shaped like most pickup truck beds. There are some various obvious indications here. Like if we look at the sides, you notice it actually does widen out there towards the top. It's narrower down there towards the bottom. And then if we go in here and take a look at the very front of the bed, you'll notice it definitely angles down there. It follows the angle of the rear seat backs. And that's quite logical because it maximizes the storage space back here. There are some pros and cons. If we're talking about the length, Using a tape measure, you'll notice that it kind of depends on exactly where you're measuring to. Back here we have 6 feet right there to the end of the bed, so 6-foot items would fit down there on the floor with the tailgate closed. 8-foot items would not hang out over the tailgate. That's a pretty handy thing if you're carrying plywood sheets, but only if you're carrying maybe about a 4-inch tall stack of plywood sheets, because that's where that aggressive angle starts to happen. And at the top of that, just below the glass, things max out at 66.5 inches, which is actually ever so slightly smaller than an F-150. So a box that would max out an F-150's bed would also max out this bed. As long as it wasn't too tall, that is, because when we measure this dimension here, you'll notice we end up right around 61 inches, which is definitely smaller than the F-150's bed, and that's measuring it all the way to the top of that sort of arrow-like fin right there that integrates with the tonneau cover. On the other hand, the bed is very slightly wider. At its narrowest point in here, it is a 1/4 inch wider than the narrowest point of an F-150 bed, but at its widest, the F-150, of course, because it steps back in after those wheel wells, it's significantly wider than this one, 65 inches versus 57 inches. And in the Cybertruck, some of this is occupied by like the AC outlets here. You can see that we receive a relatively typical sort of welder style outlet there. That's also the one that a lot of EVSEs use, 120 volt outlets on top. And then there's just a lot of focus on really practical cargo carrying touches, like this sort of utility belt-like stuff going on here on the side. At least that's what Grenadier calls it on that Ineos Grenadier that's hanging out over there. We also get these really great LED light strips all the way around the bed. That really helps illuminate things. And if you do a lot of cargo carrying or camping, or you just have a cargo organizer back here, it's going to be easier to see what's going on at the back of the bed. We also have this underfloor trunk area, so dividers in here that can be removed. It's also wash-outable. There's a little plug down there you can pull out, so that way you can clean that out more easily. Lots of really practical touches, and there are apparently power ports integrated into the roof as well, so you can plug in some other accessories. Now, on the downside, there are a few. None of the typical truck accessories like bed toolboxes, etc., are going to fit in here. You're going to have custom designed ones. Also, you will notice that if we start taking a look under the truck, there's no spare tire under there, and that's because if you want the optional spare tire, it actually gets strapped down into the bed. If you want the add-on battery, which we haven't discussed yet, that also straps into the bed. That's a 50 kilowatt hour extended battery pack. It's going to occupy somewhere between 1/3 and half of the bed, and you'll definitely occupy over half of the storage area if you want the combination of that battery and a spare tire. The range extender, which is what Tesla calls the extra battery pack, is an interesting and peculiar feature. There are a few things you should know if you're considering one. First, it's not available yet. Second, it's not user insertable and removable, so you can't wake up one morning and decide, hey, I don't want it there, I want my bed back, or I want it there tomorrow, etc. You would have to make an appointment with the Tesla Service Center and have them install and remove it. It seems like it's a permanent, more or less, installation process, although details are not available yet because you can't actually buy it yet. We also don't know exactly how much it is going to cost. Obviously, it's going to cut down on your payload capacity. The optional range extender is probably one reason that we see such high payload capacity in the Cybertruck in the first place. 2,500 pounds, but by the time you toss in the range extender, that could take 800 to 1,000 pounds off of that capacity. Now, it's not going to do anything for the underfloor storage area because it doesn't come this far back, but again, if you want to combine that with a spare tire, that is certainly something that you should keep in mind. And that's also one of the reasons that the Cybertruck is lighter than something like the F-150 or the Silverado, because this just doesn't have a battery pack as big. And if you jammed on that 50 kilowatt range extender, sorry, the 50 kilowatt hour range extender, it would probably be up there as far as the curb weights of the competition. Now, as to the why did Tesla do it this way, that is something I cannot directly answer, but I can posit a logical explanation. The base version of this Cybertruck currently, the all-wheel drive dual motor version, is just under $80,000, and that means it will qualify for a federal tax credit. This one obviously would not because it was too expensive. The other versions would not either. Now, if Tesla gave this main battery pack an extra 50 kilowatt hours, it also wouldn't qualify for the federal tax credit because the cost would rise up. But if you buy this and then you add in the extra battery pack, then hey presto, you still get the federal tax credit because that's not a factory installed option, that's a dealer installed accessory, for lack of a better word, a Tesla service center installed accessory. I know they're no dealers, but same sort of concept here. When you add on things like that, it doesn't change the MSRP for the vehicle, that purchase price before destination, and therefore you still get the tax credit. No Tesla would be complete without a front trunk, but at this point I should point out something that I hadn't noticed until I was filming this back-to-back with the F-150, and that is that the front of this is logically covered with a lot of bugs, but interestingly, because the windshield is so raked, it actually has far fewer bug strikes on it than we found in the F-150. So even though this windshield wiper wipes slower and it doesn't put out as much water, you're actually less likely to get bugs on it if you live in a really buggy area. Something that, as you can see, is definitely consideration in this area in the spring. Now, if I open the front trunk, because of the shorter dimensions of the Cybertruck, we do have a considerably smaller frunk than we find in the F-150. No particular weight rating on this front trunk like we find in the F-150. There's also no lower compartment. This is really all you get. So one set of golf clubs in there, maybe a place to store your mobile charge connector, etc. Behind this panel is where we find the HEPA air filter for the climate control system, and then over here we have the filler for the windshield wiper reservoir. With the frunk open, we get a better view of the headlights. You can see that's the low beam, we have the high beam on the inboard side, and then moving over here to this side, we have the turn signal right there, and then the marker lights right there on the side. I have to say that these headlights aren't as bright as I thought they would be. That's the button to close that frunk lid right there. They're not quite as bright as the headlights that we have in the F-150 Platinum currently. It probably comes as no surprise, but the interior is as heavily styled as the exterior is. Behind this module lives one of the active safety cameras. We also have an interior view camera like we find in some other Teslas. Up here, you may have noticed the lights that just turned off. This is a touch button bank for the transmission, so park, neutral, reverse drive, etc. These are auxiliary controls. You can also use the touchscreen. I'll show you that in a moment. This is where also we find the hazard light button. This is a really intriguing light bar. I like the design. It's really nice and slim. It functions as interior ambient lighting and also the map lights. We then have split sun visors here with a fold down section. Lots of magnets are holding everything together. So this clips up there and sticks up there with magnets. Magnets also hold that little vanity mirror section up, and they even clip this to the side. So if I pull that out, you'll notice that little spring-loaded section actually pop back in. And then if I go in closely, when it gets to the right spot, it just kind of snaps into place. I like the design of the sun visors, but they don't block a lot of critical areas right over here on the windscreen. So if I flop that down like that, you'll notice there is a reasonable amount of glass that's not being covered by the sun visor, and they don't slide forward, or side to side rather. They just move over to the side. They don't come in or out. Now that's a little bit less of a problem than in some models because this large structural beam that goes from one A-pillar to the other actually blocks out a reasonable amount of light. We of course still have a big glass roof panel as we've come to expect in a modern Tesla. You can see it extends to just about those rear passengers' heads back there. But rear passengers, if they're a little bit taller or they're really trying to lean back pretty far, they may end up bopping their heads right there on that other structural beam. This is a better view out that rear window right there. You can see it is relatively small, and of course if the tonneau cover is deployed, then you won't see anything out there at all. We also have a reasonable loss in visibility because of those large pillars, and then that triangular buttress area right back there in the cargo area. You can also see the relatively bucket shape to those rear seats that I was talking about before, the ambient lighting strips right there in the rear doors and in the front doors as well. The front seats and the outboard rear seats feature fixed in-place headrests. The front seats are perforated because these seats are both heated and ventilated. That's definitely a touch that I appreciate, and one that I know a lot of Tesla shoppers had been hoping for. Going in for a closer look at the adjustable height shoulder mechanism, you'll notice we have this little arrow here. That's where we press to actually activate the mechanism. You can lift that up if you want, but then to move it down, you press on that and then lower it back down. You'll notice that the pillars in the vehicle are all coated with this Alcantara-like imitation suede material, as is the ceiling. I really like that on a ceiling. It helps dress things up, but in this area, I wonder how well that's going to wear, especially if you live in a household where people are adjusting that. Say you have two different drivers of various heights. Moving back over to the passenger side, you'll notice we have relatively aggressive bolstering for the seat back and bottom cushion. Personally, I find these seats more comfortable than the ones in the average half-ton truck, but if you're a little bit wider, you might find especially the seat bottom cushion a little bit restrictive. Moving over to the front door panels, we find a lot of soft touch materials here. So a lot of the imitation leather product going on the doors, and then soft touch injection molded plastics lower on the doors. This is an area where we typically find luxury cars with soft touch slush molded plastics, but not trucks, because if you're wearing boots or other shoes that are really going to scrape things up, you might find that those bottom door panels don't wear long term. However, for most folks that aren't doing heavy duty construction with their vehicles, this is going to be just fine. We also have pretty large storage compartments down there on the bottom of the door that kind of makes up for the somewhat small glove compartment. There's just one. It's activated by controls over here on the touchscreen. It's right over there. Tap it to open. That slides open. Tap it to close. It's completely powered there. It's a bin style compartment, and I was able to fit an 11-inch tablet computer inside. Now, moving over to the dashboard, before we take a look at the touchscreen, obviously you're going to notice this dashboard is enormous. And that's why we have that other little window there. And it's really not so little of a window, actually. If we go over here to the driver's side, there's a view of that. It's on the outside, it's more than 20 inches long. Even on the inside, it's over 18 inches long. If I'm sitting in the driver's seat strapped in at 6 feet tall and I reach over, that's about as far as I can reach. But there's almost 3 feet of dashboard to go until you reach the very end of that glass. And that's why we have that fabric section up there that helps reduce the glare, of course, but it is going to act kind of like a mini greenhouse, and it does make the windshield kind of difficult to keep clean. If you checked out some of the shorts that we did on the Cybertruck, I kind of made a joke out of it, but it is in reality a bit of a problem, especially if you really like to keep the inside of your windshield clean. Since this is the Foundation Edition, we have the badging over there on the passenger side of the dashboard, and of course we have the slim ribbon-style air vents that are typical in Teslas. They really make the dashboard look clean and elegant. We'll talk about those a bit in just a second. Now let's take a deep dive into the defining feature of this interior, which has to be this nearly 19-inch touchscreen integrated into the dashboard. The big thing about this display is that it's really bright, it's really crisp, and it's driven by some really powerful hardware. So you'll notice this is not laggy like we find in the F-150 Lightning or even the brand new General Motors trucks, which use much faster processors than average. Doesn't matter which option we're selecting here, whether we're turning the truck on or off, or if I'm going over here to the camera option or the power options. The only delays that we see in this system are just when it doesn't recognize my finger touch because my fingers are pretty dry. Now, I am not a whiz at this software, so if it takes me a while to find an option or if I appear to be stumbling around, certainly keep that in mind. I actually find this software a bit more intuitive than what we find in the Lightning, but there are a ton of features to trip through. So if you like simple things, this is clearly not going to be for you, because as you can see here, there are a ton of different truck settings. And things like the steering wheel, they're done here in the software. Now, I have to say that is not my favorite. I wish we had just a few more physical controls, mainly mirrors and steering wheel. I would love it if those were separate, but they're here in this system. This is also refined mirror folding controls, the ride height for the air suspension, opening and closing the tonneau cover, the front trunk, the glove box, the headlights, child locks, etc. Obviously, our drive mode selections are going to be there. Off-road is going to allow us to have extra ride height. So if I click that one, go back to controls, you can see we have the extra ride height there. Obviously, custom allows you to customize those various combinations. Towing and hauling, this is another area where I would prefer a physical control, because when trailer mode is engaged, then you'll notice that we have access to trailer brake gain, and the right scroll wheel becomes the trailer brake controller. And I would rather just have a physical controller rather than trying to deal with that. On the charging screen, obviously pretty typical there. You can open your charging port, set your charging current, etc. And of course your daily charging limit. You can also enable and disable the various power outlets in the front trunk, on the roof, or the AC outlets around the vehicle, and then you'll get an AC power output number right there. I will say that when you turn on some of these modes, the suspension, when you're waggling the steering wheel or engaging the AC outlets, you'll notice that the cabin is not as quiet as the Lightning or the Silverado. Some things here just whir around a little bit more. Now, the software is not complete in the Cybertruck. That is probably one of the big demerits that people have been commenting on. So since this launched, a few things have been added, but we still don't have things like full self-driving or the enhanced autopilot. We also don't have the availability of lockers. So they exist on the truck, but you cannot turn them on or off just yet. Moving down here, we'll notice one of the features that is working, and that is the ultra-wideband technology, which currently works with modern Apple iPhones. Google smartphone support is coming a little bit later. Ultra-wideband support basically turns your phone into a smart key for the vehicle, something that Tesla has been trying to move away from. Obviously, they've been wanting people to use Bluetooth connections with the phones, but that is a little bit less reliable, it's a little bit more power hungry, and it doesn't know exactly where around the vehicle the phone is. So if I have the vehicle over here near the driver's door, With the ultra-wideband technology, it will just unlock the driver's door, just like the regular key would. It doesn't allow someone to go do the other functions on the vehicle. Really handy touch. Also, again, uses less power and it's more reliable. This is probably coming to other Tesla products in the future and, again, different smartphones as well. Then obviously we have the headlight controls there, trip computer information, navigation details, safety, service, software, blah, 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 blah. And that takes me along to the energy screen, which has become better over the years in Tesla models. It's really decently accurate at estimating your range. The navigation software, it also is pretty decent. It's improved over the years, and you can see it's pretty snappy. All we're doing is waiting for the data to load, but moving around the map is definitely very, very quick. Bluetooth interface, calendar interface there. Over here we have the camera option. You can see the front cameras and the rear cameras depending on the drive mode that we're in. Now if we're in drive, we have another camera view available which helps compensate for the fact that that tonneau cover is covering the rear window. You can drag it into two different places. You can have it there, or you can have it over there, or you can have it turned off. Any way you put it, it is a little bit small and I think less convenient than just having a decent rear view mirror. So that's certainly something that you should keep in mind. In this middle option, we have a bunch of other apps. So games, theater, toy boxes, etc., browser, all that good jazz that you've heard about in Teslas. Of course, we have the left seat heating and cooling there, or the auto mode, heated steering wheel, front defroster, etc. Then over here, we have the typical visualization for the active safety system. So if I was driving along, it would show you the other cars, the lane lines, etc. Here is the main place where people are probably going to be shifting their car, drive, reverse right there, sliding across. That becomes second nature after a while, but again, you can use those controls up top if you want. Now, if you'd rather have a regular shifter, clearly this is not the vehicle for you. We then have a little widget down here which can be selected between your audio interface, tire pressure. It also shows you your ground clearance, 12.8 inches there currently, current drive and drive sense charge, etc. Down here we have the climate control controls, and that's where we control that ribbon style air vent coming out of the dash. You can also split the air. The obvious advantage here is that as this icon shows, you can actually have the air coming through the steering wheel because, of course, there is no instrument cluster behind the steering wheel. We just have those big air vents there, and this oddly small, I guess, squircle, square steering wheel, whatever we want to call this. It's not a yoke. I'm happy about that, but I do wish it was larger diameter. It feels relatively thin-rimmed and just relatively small as well. Also, the steering is pretty quick, so it can feel just a little bit twitchy sometimes out on the road. Most folks are probably going to get used to that, however. One thing that I have no problem with, though, are these turn signals on the steering wheel. I know that's been somewhat controversial, but versus a stock, I just don't see any real difference. Here, they automatically turn themselves off once your lane change has been completed. You can also cancel them by clicking them again, and it's going to do that based on its camera input. So it sees the lane lines, and once you've actually changed lanes, it turns off. So it doesn't just blink 3 times, it blinks however long it takes you to actually change lanes. Over here we have the windshield washer button, so we click once and we get one wipe. We also get this little menu here where we can adjust the wiper speed or turn it to auto, and a reminder that if we press and hold that button, it's actually going to spray the windshield. That's for the adaptive cruise control there, that little cruise control icon. And then we have little roller controls that perform various functions in the system, like volume up, down, or adjusting the steering wheel, etc. Be sure and sound off in the comment section below. Let me know what you think about the interior. Is it clean? Is it modern? Is it too austere? What do you think? I do love the amount of storage that we find in here, especially down below that big touchscreen. You can see that we have this absolutely huge storage area down there. But I have to admit that sometimes the modernity, I guess the modern feel in here, does feel just a little bit cold sometimes. Over here we find 2 really big Qi wireless charge mats. No problem fitting larger smartphones in there, and even in thicker cases with the big bump out cameras, no problem charging them. Over here we have a NACS J1772 adapter, so you can plug into those older style J1772 charge outlets. Here we have a smaller center console than you find in the average half-ton truck, and this is probably the area where you're really going to notice the size difference versus something like a Lightning or a Silverado or a Ram the most. It's that between the front seats, that center console area is just not as wide. Some of you might also notice that the door feels a little bit closer to the driver, the center console obviously feels a little bit closer to my other leg, and the passenger and the driver are going to be a little bit closer together. On the other hand, if you have larger feet, you're really going to love the size of these footwells. They're absolutely huge, and that's thanks to that completely flat floor in here. We do, of course, have a dead pedal over here on the left side, but the footwell is nice and large for people with larger feet, definitely very, very roomy. All right, it's time to get the Cybertruck out on the road, and I apologize for any repetition. Some portions of this will actually appear in the versus Lightning video just due to the amount of time that I have with the truck, and I need to get this back to a supercharger station because we're running real low on battery. Now, down here at 21%, obviously 0 to 60 times are a little bit challenged, but if I floor it, it's still pretty darn peppy. 0 to 60 times actually have stretched out further than the Lightning did, however, down here at this pretty similar battery state of charge. I ran 0 to 60 in 5 seconds in the chill mode. If I go over here to standard, it definitely is a little bit peppier. It's 4.7 seconds down here at 20%. Now, when it wasn't at 20%, when it was at 25%, then it was really fast. It was 3.7 seconds 0 to 60. So actually, surprisingly faster than the Tesla estimates, and definitely faster than the Lightning, of course, as you'd expect. This has a little bit more power and it's a little bit lighter, so that faster performance is absolutely not surprising at all. Now, I know some of you asked down there in the comment section below, yes, our times are all done with 1 foot of rollout. Obviously, if you exclude the rollout, it would take a little bit longer. I know some folks really dislike 0 to 60 times being delivered with rollout, but that's the industry standard way of doing it. And until everybody changes, I think it's just most sensible to continue talking about 0 to 60 the way that most companies and most magazines and other video people are talking about it, and the way most measurement tools are designed to measure 0 to 60 times. That's just the world that we live in. At any rate, any way you slice it, very quick. Also, stops shorter than the Lightning. This stopped from 60 miles an hour back to 0 in 128 feet, which is definitely shorter than the Lightning. I actually am surprised that that wasn't a little bit shorter, but it is likely that these tires are maybe a little bit more designed for efficiency than I had initially anticipated. Also, they seem to have a slightly more rugged off-road mission in mind than some of the EV trucks that I've driven lately. Now, as far as handling goes, it doesn't seem to affect it because this does feel surprisingly good in the corners. Some of that has to do with the steering. The steering is very quick. It's also pretty light. Not everybody is going to be a fan of the way the steering rack works in the Cybertruck. It is a full steer-by-wire system. There's no mechanical connection between here and the wheels. The car is trying to give us some feedback dialed back through the electric motors. And it's an extreme variable ratio system. So the ratio slows down out here on the road. You notice I'm turning it, about the same amount that I would be turning maybe in a parking lot maneuver, but we're just going around these corners pretty gently. Now, as the speed starts to decrease, then things actually get a little bit twitchier. So now if we're down here at, say, 20 miles an hour and I turn it that much, it's a pretty aggressive steer. We also have 4-wheel steering. So the rear wheels are doing their thing back there up to 10 degrees currently. There is some rumor that software updates in the future will actually increase that, so that way they can have extra mobility in parking lots. But that's definitely one reason to get the Cybertruck over the competition, outside of maybe the Hummer, is that this turns really tightly for a truck this size. Yes, it is smaller than the F-150, but it's not just due to that, it's also due to that rear wheel steering system. When it comes to handling as far as trucks go, I'm certainly going to give this an A, but there needs to be at least a little bit of an asterisk here in that the feel of the Cybertruck is solidly unusual. The adaptive air suspension, the steer-by-wire system, the weight of the truck, the fact that the suspension is fully independent, we have high-profile tires, etc., but really quick steering, all of this, the slightly twitchy feeling sometimes, it comes together, making this feel more like a sports car than a truck. And for some people, that's going to be all the reason to get a Cybertruck, but for a traditional truck person, that might be a reason to avoid one. Not everybody is going to be a fan of this steering wheel as well. Again, it feels a little on the small side, and it definitely takes some getting used to with the flat top and the flat bottom design. But I certainly find this much easier to use and more logical than the yoke steering wheel that we found in the Model S and Model X. I think there's a reason that they brought back the real wheel as an option there, because that wheel is just a little bit too funky. This, I think, solves the problem. Had they just gone here to the Squircle, I think it would have been just fine from the very beginning. Logically, the ride quality is going to depend on which drive mode you're in and which suspension height you have chosen in the Cybertruck. Right now, I'm in the off-road mode where things are not only firm, they're a little bit peculiar, because basically what's gone on is The airbags have pumped up, pushing the tires all the way down the middle of the vehicle, all the way up as far as possible, so you have a lot less suspension travel. This feels a little bit like a first generation Grand Cherokee with the adaptive air suspension. When you go over larger bumps like that, you will definitely feel those imperfections really coming into the cabin and the suspension kind of struggling with the amount of suspension travel left. Of course, that's in very high. If I move down to the high mode where things lower by at least 1.5 inches, then things are considerably softer. Then they feel more like the average Land Rover with the adaptive air suspension, or the current generation Stellantis products with the adaptive air suspension as well. And then of course, if I move back to the regular mode here, where I'm gonna go ahead and choose the just standard ride height, things end up very, very smooth. As far as a full-size truck ride quality goes in North America, I would say this is actually pretty similar to the Ram 1500 with the adaptive air suspension. I think that the Ram feels a little bit more traditional just due to the weight of the truck. This is still a little on the heavy side, even though it is the lightest truck with a big battery currently in America. But I would say this is a very, very close second. And it does feel better than the Lightning out on the road. Also, I think better than the Silverado. Now, at this point, when I'm recording this video, I haven't driven the RST, but I'm actually driving that Silverado RST. I think it's next week. So be sure and stay tuned for that video coming up very, very soon. This handles potholes, road speed bumps, road imperfections, etc. incredibly well. Those big potholes there, actually not a problem. Not just because of the adaptive air suspension, but also because we have really high profile tires in this. This is not an ultra low profile EV. Now, as far as the unusual feel goes, I think actually some of that has to do just with the interaction of the steering and the steer-by-wire system. The steer-by-wire system's claim to fame is that it can isolate the driver from some of the road imperfections, and maybe that's what's going on. Maybe I'm just expecting them to come through the steering rack, and they're absolutely not. There's really very little that actually comes back through the steering rack. We also get an extreme variable ratio system in this vehicle, as I said earlier. So at lower speed maneuvers, just a small move of the steering wheel really causes this to change directions very rapidly, and it can feel a little bit twitchy until you've really gotten used to the steering and really dialed it in. Now that we're back out on a paved road, it's time to talk about cabin noise. At 50 miles an hour, I measured 71 decibels in here, which is definitely louder than the Lightning. Although interestingly, as the traffic passes by me here, you'll notice less wind noise as they pass by because we get better sound isolation from the glass. What's going on? Well, it's all coming from the road. We have wider tires, slightly more aggressive tires in this than we have in the Lightning, and it's a unibody truck as well. And that's important because the part of the structure where the tires, the wheels, etc. are all mounted is the exact same part of the body where I am riding, and it's all one piece. And in a body-on-frame classic truck, you would have separation between the body and the frame, hence the name body-on-frame. They actually are not bolted directly together, so you actually get a quieter cabin with vehicles of that design, and that is really going to be obvious if you drive these back to back. That's also the likely reason that we get more motor noise in the cabin of the Cybertruck. So if you're not a fan of the way the electric motors sound when they're whirring along, personally I don't mind them at all, but if you don't like them, you should know you're going to hear more of that in this cabin because we don't get as much sound isolation in the cabin. You're also going to hear some somewhat unusual noises around the vehicle when the vehicle is parked. So you're certainly going to hear the air conditioning compressor more, you're going to hear the air pump and the air suspension that of course we don't have in the Lightning, and you're going to hear the rear wheel steering rack, moving along. If you're parked and you're just waggling the steering wheel one side to the other, or even if you're just crawling along at low speeds in a parking lot, the sound is definitely peculiar. Something you're going to get used to, but something that is still going to be there. Now we need to dive into the tricky subject of fuel efficiency. Over a week of mixed driving, I've been averaging between 2 and about 2.35 miles per kilowatt hour. That is definitely above the F-150 Lightning, but this entire week, I have also had someone drive the Lightning while I have been driving this. I've been driving them back to back, day after day after day, the exact same places. To Home Depot, to the beach, to the office, to home, on a road trip that we preconceived just to add an extra 100 miles to the odometer, etc. Back to back, absolutely in lockstep. And interestingly enough, they both went the exact same distance. By the time I ended up at home right before shooting this video, we had about 50 miles of range in each truck. We're now down at 18%, and apparently the Lightning is down at around 18% as well. Now remember, 18% in the Lightning is actually more power than 18% here, so the Lightning is less efficient, but as far as range goes, the two track incredibly similarly. And now that's going to depend on your speed. At higher speeds, apparently this seems to be a bit more efficient than the Lightning, although I haven't been able to get solid data on that. Of course, you can all troll around through the EPA filings if you want even more detailed information on that. But basically, the two vehicles are very, very similar. And I really don't know where you would get 340 miles of combined range in this truck, unless you're driving relatively slowly. Now, remember that the EPA combined cycle range leans heavily towards the city fuel economy range numbers, not the highway range numbers. And if you're doing loops around Manhattan, I'm sure that's fine, but most people want to know how far can you go A to B if you're going 70 miles an hour on the open highway. And it's not going to be quite 300 miles in this or in the Lightning. Both of them are going to be, maybe 30, 40 miles below that if that's what you're doing. Bottom line for the Cybertruck, this is as different on the inside in terms of its driving nature as it is on the outside. It doesn't necessarily drive like any other Tesla out there. I had sort of assumed that it would drive kind of like a Model S or a Model Y that also have an adaptive air suspension, but to be honest, it doesn't exactly drive like one of those. The ride quality is a little bit closer. It's perhaps a little bit firmer. You can tell it's bigger. It's definitely heavier as well. The steering, it is a world away from any other thing that I have driven outside of the steer-by-wire Lexus RX, which has actually a very similar philosophy and design to what we see here. Now, there have been other attempts at steer-by-wire, but nothing quite like what we see in the Cybertruck at the moment, in that there is no physical connection at all, the one side to the other. And that certainly gives the Cybertruck a video game-like feel. Now, bearing in mind that I commute on roads like this every day, I have to say that the lack of visibility is definitely a problem on winding roads like this, because from the driver's perspective, I just can't see around a lot of these corners. I'm in this corner, I can't see if there's a bicycle there, which there are a lot of on this road, or maybe there's a motorcycle I missed at first glance. The blind spots are definitely very, very large, especially towards the rear. Now, I'm actually a little bit less offended by the rear blind spots because, people drive panel vans successfully with no rear view mirror, etc. that's functional. And I do get the rear camera. I think that's okay. If I really wanted to see things, I could lower the tonneau cover and sort of squint through the letterbox in the back. But these pillars up here, that's certainly more of a problem. And that's all due to the particular design that they chose with this and that really aggressive cab forward design. It would be considerably less of a blind spot if it had more of a traditional windshield that ended right about there on the dashboard. There's just no way around that. And those pillars are relatively large. On the other hand, if you're looking for a bold styling statement, it honestly does not get much more bold than the Cybertruck.